The chamber was stifling. Heat clung to the stone walls like a second skin, thick with the scent of sweat, bile, and something worse, something sweet and rotting. Gold plates lay scattered across the floor, some broken, others licked clean of whatever grotesque feast had filled them. His breath came in ragged gulps, thick and wet, like trying to inhale through a mouthful of blood. The crown had fallen, rolled into a corner where no one dared retrieve it. It watched him, or so it seemed, its sharp edges gleaming dimly in the light of flickering tallow candles. There was no court now, no whispers, no guards, only the rasp of flesh against velvet as he clawed at his chest, wide-eyed, lips foaming. His fingers were red and gold-red from the inside, gold from the madness. His mouth opened wider than a man's should, a gasp, then a scream, not loud but thin, pathetic, scraping through the room like wind through a tomb. His belly distended, bulging with something unnatural spasmed beneath his silken robes. Coins, metal, powdered fragments of what he believed made him immortal. His body convulsed like a puppet with its strings snapped. His eyes were already gone, rolled back into the skull as if he could not bear to see the ending he'd crafted for himself. The priests said nothing. Their silence was not reverent. It was fear, tightly wound behind hollow faces. And then silence again. But it wasn't peace. It was the silence of something unnatural being still. The kind of stillness that comes only when a body no longer knows how to die properly. The king who had swallowed his glory had finally been swallowed by it. They told you he was divine, chosen, that his blood was touched by the gods and his skin shone beneath his robes like sunlight. In the courtly paintings he glows, lips smiling, robes gilded, a scepter balanced perfectly in hand. They show him standing tall over a land at peace, his subjects bowing with joy, not fear. A benevolent ruler wrapped in the sacred authority of heaven and empire. They speak of his golden tongue, his clever policies, the way he brought trade and prosperity to a faltering kingdom. He was, they say, a philosopher king, the last of the ancients reborn. But they do not show the rooms beneath the palace, where his alchemists worked by firelight and madness. They do not show the vats of mercury, the decaying flesh of test animals, the glass vials that carried sickness and promise in equal measure. They do not speak of the boy he buried alive beneath the temple steps to sanctify a new age, or the nobles who disappeared after questioning why gold shipments no longer reached the treasury, or the masked physicians who never left his side not because he was sick, but because they feared what might happen if he went a day without their tinctures and powders. They never mention the night he declared himself a god, not metaphorically but truly, that his bones were made of sunlight, his veins of molten wealth. They whisper about it in old monasteries, how he forbade common food and demanded that his meals be made of the metal itself. Gold flakes in every wine, coins dissolved into broth. It was, he claimed, the path to incorruptibility, that the body could not rot if it had already become eternal. They say the people loved him, but love born from trembling hands and silent obedience is not love. It is terror wearing the mask of loyalty. The myth they sold you was clean, regal, immortal. But beneath the gilded surface, the truth was corroding everything it touched. And in the end, not even the gold could keep him from screaming. Before he ate gold, he devoured men. The boy who would one day crown himself with molten glory was not born into divine favor, at least not in the way the poets would later pretend. He was the third son, quiet and strange, with eyes too pale and a voice that lingered a moment too long on every word. His brothers were warriors, loud, handsome, beloved. They died young, one in a hunting accident that left nothing but bones and a bloodied crown of antlers. The second drowned, though the lake had been calm and the servants sworn silent. And the firstborn the heir fell from a tower he had climbed since childhood, his body twisted into a shape that no longer resembled a prince. The third son mourned as was expected, and then he smiled. The court didn't see it at first. The slow reweaving of power, the way he turned sorrow into opportunity. He whispered to the grieving queen, soothed the heartbroken king, promised the nobles stability in a time of sudden chaos. He held their hands, fed them words, and drained them dry behind velvet curtains. His rise was not a storm, it was a sickness. Quiet, spreading, irreversible. He understood fear better than love, and he used it well. He reorganized the court, banished the old priests, declared new festivals in honor of forgotten gods. He built temples not for worship but for mirrors. Every hall, every chamber reflected his image. He walked among polished gold statues of himself, taller than any saint or soldier, gleaming like the sun, though the sky was often gray. His obsession began as fascination and interest in the divine properties of metal. He surrounded himself with alchemists, not charlatans but true believers. Men who had long since abandoned dreams of gold forging and instead sought what lay beyond the merging of spirit and element. Immortality not through life, but through transformation. They experimented first on beggars, then criminals, then on themselves. Some drank liquefied metals. Others inhaled the smoke of burning gold mixed with sacred herbs. Many died violently. Others lost their minds, speaking only in tongues no one could recognize. One man tore out his eyes, claiming he had seen eternity reflected in a bronze bowl. The prince watched it all, not with horror but with longing. When the old king finally died, the court expected mourning. Instead, they found him already seated on the throne, wearing a robe of gold thread and silence. No coronation was held, no declaration made. He simply existed. Like the sun had risen in the center of the palace, and none dared to look directly at him. He began to change. His skin, once pale, took on a dull sheen, as if something inside him was polishing its way out. He no longer ate what others did. Each meal was prepared by priests trained in alchemical rites. They boiled coins into broth, mixed powders of crushed metal with honey, and offered him plates that shimmered faintly under the light. He grew thinner but not weaker. He claimed it was purification, that the soul could not ascend while weighed down by the filth of mortal flesh. He believed he was becoming something new, something beyond kingship, beyond death. And the people they followed. He built monuments not to gods but to himself, spires taller than cathedrals, facades coated in beaten gold. He taxed the land into dust to fund them. Crops withered, but the gold flowed. Artisans wept, but the statues rose. His face became the only face in every hall. His name replaced even the names of the months. Time itself bowed to him. And those who objected, they disappeared. Not in the traditional sense. There were no executions, no dungeons. They were erased, names struck from records, homes sealed, memories cauterized. It was said that to speak against him was to invite silence into your lineage, not just your death, but your forgetting. He ruled through awe, and awe calcified into madness. The final step came when he declared himself not just God, but element. "I am the metal," he whispered before the full court, "not forged, not found. I am the first vein of gold in the heart of the world." He ordered his own blood drawn and tested. The priests returned, pale and shaking. They swore they had seen particles, tiny golden fragments suspended in crimson. Whether it was truth or illusion didn't matter. The myth had teeth. And so the king, who began as a forgotten third son, unloved and unnoticed, crowned himself with more than power. He crowned himself with eternity. The cracks came softly like a whisper in the dark. At first it was the mirrors. Dozens shattered without cause all at once across the inner sanctum of the palace, spiderweb cracks crawling across the king's reflection until even his divine image splintered into fragments. The priests blamed a change in the weather, a shift in the wind, but those closest to him saw the way he froze mid-sentence, as if a part of him had broken too. Then came the bleeding. Not wounds, not in the traditional sense. His gums, swollen and dark, would bleed during meals. His breath began to sour, metallic and sharp. Servants reported finding blood on his linens, thick and golden-hued as though rust and regality had fused. He claimed it was the divine leaving his body in preparation for ascension. That pain was merely the shedding of mortal skin. But even gods should not forget their own name. His memory faltered. Not the memories of war or conquest, those remained intact, recited like sacred verses, but the small things slipped, the names of his attendants, the layout of the halls he had designed himself. He would stop mid-stride, eyes clouding, mumbling to no one. He asked where his mother was, a woman who had been dead for decades. He began speaking to his statues, waiting for them to reply. The court still bowed, still offered prayers, but their eyes were beginning to change. Behind every ritual lay unease, behind every chant, a held breath. Whispers returned to the kingdom, whispers that had not dared breathe in years. Some said the king was rotting from the inside. Others claimed the gold he consumed had poisoned not just his body, but the very air of the palace, that the stones themselves had grown sick under his reign. The crops failed again that winter. The gold could no longer feed the land, but he demanded more offerings, more temples, more proof of devotion. He told the people that suffering was the price of transformation, that only through starvation would they taste the divine. It was a noble who defied him first. A young lord, distant cousin of the royal bloodline, spoke during a feast. His voice trembled, but it held. He asked simply why the people died while their king gorged himself on wealth. The room froze. The king did not answer. He stared at the noble with glassy eyes and a thin smile, then stood and walked out, saying only, "He has named himself, the metal remembers." The noble was found days later, not dead, but missing. His estate was razed, his name struck from every ledger. His family silenced, but the fear this time didn't suppress the court. It spread it. From then on, the king rarely emerged. He spoke only through his high priests, who now wore masks of hammered gold and robes soaked in strange perfumes. They claimed the king's body had become too holy to be perceived, that sight of him would blind common men. But behind closed doors, his closest aides saw the truth. His skin had begun to flake, patches of gray and gold peeling from his limbs like old paint. His teeth, once white and sharp, had yellowed, softened, decayed. He coughed up flecks of blood during council meetings, then swallowed them with pride. He could barely walk without assistance, and still, he smiled. He believed it was working. He believed the suffering meant transcendence. But beneath the throne room, in the libraries sealed from the public, the royal physicians had recorded something else entirely. Dozens of pages detailing the slow effects of metal poisoning, tremors, memory loss, lesions, decay. They wrote in code, hidden within the margins of alchemical texts, afraid their truth would damn them. One of them tried to flee the palace. He never made it past the gates. By now, the palace itself had begun to change. Gold leaf curled from the columns. Statues cracked under their own weight. The once mirrored halls grew dim, their silver tarnished to black. The air smelled of sulfur, sweat, and something faintly sweet, the rot of opulence decaying in real time. No one visited anymore. Foreign dignitaries sent gifts but stayed away. The kingdom, once a jewel of trade, had become a myth, whispered with pity, the empire of the golden corpse. The people waited. They did not know what for: a sign, a rebellion, a death, something, anything. But the king did not die. He endured, barely a flickering shadow behind the walls. And the end, though near, refused to come swiftly. There was no executioner, no blade, no rope, no trumpet of justice echoing through the stone courtyards. For a man who fashioned himself eternal, death came not as punishment but as prophecy. And yet it was crueler than any axe ever forged. It began in his sleep, or what little of it he still permitted. The palace was still. Outside, the wind scratched along the marble, pulling at banners faded and fraying. Inside his chamber, a silence deeper than stone had taken hold, the kind that swells before collapse. He was found not by a physician or a priest, but by a servant girl carrying his morning elixir, a thin, shimmering broth flecked with gold dust and crushed opal. She did not scream. She only backed away, eyes wide, the bowl trembling in her hands. He had fallen from his bed, slumped on the cold, tiled floor like spilled wax, his robe twisted around his legs, his crown dented where it had struck the stone. His fingers were curled, clawed toward his chest as though trying to rip something out from the inside. And his eyes, those once prized pale orbs, were open, staring, glassy, but not with fear, with confusion. As if death had arrived unannounced, a guest not invited, not believed in. The priests came first, then the physicians, then the guards. Each entered in hushed awe, then horror. The king had not simply died, he had decayed. His skin was discolored, a patchwork of pale bruises and dark veins. A sickly sheen of sweat clung to him. His mouth was open, lips cracked, and inside, along the gums and throat, glistened something that looked metallic, hardened, encrusted. He had been swallowing gold for too long. It had not preserved him. It had turned him into a tomb. His body was heavy, unnaturally so. When they tried to lift him, something shifted beneath the skin, like sediment inside a cracked jar. His belly, long distended from his diet of alchemical concoctions, had begun to stiffen. Inside, they would later find not organs but a sludge of unprocessed metal, coagulated into layers of yellow and black. His intestines, shriveled and brittle, broke at a touch. His bones were porous, corroded from within. He had become his own monument, hollow, weighted, unnatural. But no one dared speak it. The palace responded the way all tyrannies do when their core is removed, with chaos masked as reverence. The high priests declared it a golden transfiguration, that his body had ascended beyond flesh, that he would return in 3 days, reborn, not in heaven but within the metal veins of the earth. They ordered all windows sealed. No one was to enter or leave the inner sanctum. The corpse was not to be touched. He is not dead, they said. He is becoming. But the smell said otherwise. Within hours, the golden corridors were filled with something sour, not the rot of meat, but of meaning, of belief gone stagnant, of lies collapsing under their own weight. The body remained on the floor. They could not move it, not just for ceremony, but because they were afraid that if they touched it, it might crumble, or worse, speak. By the 2nd day, maggots had found their way beneath his robe. By the 3rd, the silence could no longer hold. One of the younger physicians, trembling, broke the sacred order and covered the body in a burial cloth soaked with perfume and herbs. He was executed by the guards an hour later, quietly, behind the stone garden. His name was never recorded. But it was the beginning. The walls, once polished, began to sweat. Not water, but a yellowish fluid that oozed from the cracks, staining the stone. Statues of the king crumbled overnight. His golden face, once smiling from every hallway, now lay in pieces at the feet of those who still dared to walk the halls. Whispers turned to murmurs. Murmurs turned to screams. Some claimed to hear knocking beneath the floorboards. Others swore they saw the king's reflection in mirrors that had long since broken. One servant ran mad through the eastern wing, clawing at her ears, crying that she could hear him singing in a language that wasn't human. The palace exiled itself. Food stopped arriving. The guards stopped reporting. The priests locked the main gates from the inside, declaring that the king's final transformation required isolation. To witness it would mean blindness. To doubt it would mean death. But even they began to vanish. Some slit their own throats, gold coins pressed into their mouths as a final offering. Others drank the same concoctions they once fed to the king, hoping to join him to ascend. They foamed at the mouth, choked and fell, their eyes golden and blind. No rebellion came. No soldiers stormed the palace. No war was waged. Because outside the world had already moved on. The kingdom bled dry by its monarch's obsession had fractured. Neighboring lands seized borders, trade dissolved. The people buried their dead, turned their backs to the mountain of gold, and whispered new prayers to older gods. Inside, the body remained. Days passed, weeks perhaps, no one knows for sure. Time no longer held meaning in a palace where death could not be named. Eventually the tomb was sealed, not with stone but with silence. They closed the doors, doused the torches, let the wind claim the halls. The kingdom never held another coronation. No heir was named, no history was officially written. The king who ate gold was left to rot in his palace of mirrors and ghosts. His scream, if it ever came, was swallowed by the wealth he worshipped. And so ended the man who sought to make his body immortal, only to find it had become the cage that trapped his dying mind. Not a martyr, not a god, just a man, eaten alive by what he could not let go. The palace became a wound that never closed. Even after the doors were sealed, even after the priests were entombed within their own delusions, the world did not dare forget what had happened on that mountain of mirrors. They couldn't, not entirely. The gold still existed buried beneath the silence, beneath the dust and vines that crept over the marble walls like time reclaiming what glory had abandoned. In the villages below, they called it the Hollow Throne. Children were warned never to speak the king's name after dark. Old women swore that on moonless nights the hills glowed faintly with a sickly yellow light. Traders avoided the roads leading to the capital even when the path was shorter. They said the earth there had a sound like breath beneath the soil. But nature, unlike men, does not keep shrines to madness. The roots came first, twisting through the cracks in the courtyard tiles, crawling over statues until their faces vanished beneath moss and thorn. Rain fell harder in that region, as if the sky itself sought to rinse the stone of memory. Birds no longer nested in the eaves. Animals circled wide around the palace, sensing something unholy in the stillness. Years passed, then decades. A warlord from the west tried to claim the throne once, declared himself reborn through blood and ash. He sent scouts to the capital. None returned. His army dissolved before it reached the gate, not in battle but in fear. His own men turned on him in the night, whispering of curses, of voices in dreams telling them to kneel or be buried. The warlord's bones were found years later, gold melted to his jaw, teeth fused shut. Others came pilgrims, treasure seekers, scholars. They searched for the king's body, for his hidden chamber, for relics that might turn flesh to glory. None found what they sought. Those who returned were changed. Silent, paler than before. One man gouged out his tongue on the steps of a monastery, drawing spirals in his own blood before collapsing. The kingdom above had fractured beyond repair. No ruler emerged to unite the pieces. Every noble who tried to claim the golden legacy met ruin, disease, mutiny, disappearances. Some say the king's curse was not vengeance but hunger, that his death did not end his appetite, only scattered it. The fields returned slowly. With the gold mines closed, the earth healed. Rivers once polluted with runoff flowed clear again. The peasants, long forgotten, grew strong in their distance from the palace. New towns rose, built from stone and humility. No towers, no temples, just roofs low enough that the stars remained visible. And still no one rebuilt the palace. It stood not as ruin but as warning. Its spires, half collapsed, reached crookedly into the clouds like fingers clawing for light. Inside, it was said, the king's body still lay on the floor where he had fallen mummified by poison, wrapped in the echoes of a death too large to vanish. Some claimed his eyes had never closed, that he watched the doorway waiting for the next fool to believe they, too, could live forever. The land had no name for what he had become, not king, not corpse, something else. A lesson carved not in stone but in absence. No statues of him were raised, no holidays celebrated. His name was struck from every surviving document. Even the royal lineage ended with a blank space where his reign should have been. And yet, he remained, not alive, but loud. In every whispered tale, every village fire lit to keep the night at bay, children asked the same question. Why did he eat gold? And the elders always answered the same way, with silence. Then, after a pause, they would say, because he feared what waited inside him more than death. There are some deaths that do not die. They linger not in flesh but in echo, in the spaces left behind, in the places people avoid not because they are haunted but because they remind us of the hunger we carry. The king who ate gold left no lineage, no tombstone, no final proclamation carved in marble, and yet he remains one of the most remembered men in forgotten history precisely because he tried to erase what made him human. Power did not kill him. Fear did. Not the fear of enemies or rebellions or even death itself, but the deeper, quieter dread that gnaws beneath every crown. The fear of being ordinary and of rotting, of vanishing into the same dirt as the peasants one commands. He refused that fate. He believed he could outpace it, outshine it, swallow it. And in doing so, he became a monument to his own undoing. For centuries after, kings wore smaller crowns. Priests no longer mixed gold into wine. Alchemists were watched, not because people feared magic, but because they feared belief. The kind of belief that demands sacrifice not from others, but from the self. The kind that turns flesh into a temple and then forgets it was ever flesh at all. He has no name now, or rather too many. In one land he is called the Gilded Ghost, in another the Hollow God. Among desert tribes they whisper of the mouth that never closed. And in quiet libraries beneath candlelight, scholars refer to him only as the vein, because he tried to become the bloodstream of the world and instead became a blockage. But this is not just history, it is prophecy. Because even now his story plays out again and again, in palaces, in boardrooms, in studios, in temples, and stages. Wherever someone begins to believe they are more than a body, that adoration is immunity, that worship is preservation, the shadow of the king flickers behind their smile. We build statues to men like him, not to honor them, but to remind ourselves of how far we can fall in pursuit of staying upright. He is not evil, nor was he mad. He was what we all are, magnified. A mirror, A warning. A man who mistook gold for glory and paid in the only currency the soul truly holds, selfhood. And so, though the palace has collapsed, though the world has changed, his scream remains. Not loud, not constant, but buried in stone, in silence, in every breath we hold when power tempts us to forget we are mortal. The body was gone, but the echo of his scream never left the stone.